The smell of roasted chicken lingered in the air that Sunday evening, yet the room tasted like tension. I watched my sister, Carly, lift her glass as if making a toast. Her voice smooth but weighted $15,000. The number landed between us like a stone on glass. My pulse didn't rise, it sank. I had heard variations of this melody before, requests disguised as emergencies, guilt dressed as family duty. Mom's eyes waited for my surrender. I'd already carried their mistakes through college loans, rent, car repairs. This wasn't love anymore. It was taxation disguised as loyalty. Inside, I felt the small rebellion that had lived quietly for years finally stand upright. When I said no, the silence was immediate and enormous. I didn't argue, didn't justify, just no. I watched their faces twist between shock and outrage. "So, you'll watch us struggle?" That sentence echoed long after I left the table, but I knew what I'd whisper back to the empty night, not my emergency. Back home, the city hummed below my apartment window. My hands didn't shake when I reached for my phone. I read Mom's message, $15 Kelvins or lose family. The threat was almost tender in its predictability. I exhaled once, opened settings, and pressed one quiet button that changed everything. The first vibration came instantly, then another, then dozens more. Calls stacked until the screen went crimson with missed connections, 41 in total. I didn't answer. I poured myself water, steady and cold, and listened to the sound. It wasn't noise. It was freedom, learning to speak. Sometimes saying no is the only way to hear yourself again. If you've ever had to choose peace over family pressure, share your story. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more family revenge stories that hit too close to home. By morning, the world pretended to return to normal, but my phone had turned into an alarm for guilt. Every vibration carried a version of their disappointment, missed calls stacked like a pulse I didn't want to feel. Messages arrived in waves, one begging, another scolding, each accusing me of coldness I had finally learned to name as self-preservation. I silenced the screen and sat by the window, coffee cooling untouched. The sky outside looked washed out, the kind of gray that makes people apologize for things they didn't do. I had nothing left to apologize for. Inside my chest, the quiet grew steady, not peace exactly, but clarity disguised as exhaustion. By noon, my voicemail filled up. Mom's tone shifted across hours, soft plea, sharp guilt, weary threat. Carly followed, her words dripping with the practiced panic of someone allergic to consequences. I watched the notifications multiply, knowing the real emergency was theirs, not mine. For years, I had mistaken noise for connection. That morning proved how loud control could sound when it starts to die. At work, I tried to blend into the rhythm of keyboards and muted conversations. Blair noticed before I said a word. She didn't ask questions, just placed a cup of tea on my desk, her silence an act of mercy. The gesture reminded me that kindness didn't have to demand repayment. When my manager called me in later, I expected another project, not a lifeline. A promotion, new position in Cincinnati, relocation covered, clean start. I smiled, small and private. The universe doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it hands you a key. That evening I opened my laptop. The glow felt surgical, cutting through hesitation. I logged into the bank portal, years of scheduled transfers blinking like tiny leashes. Each one represented a history of surrender, family support, emergency fund, Mom's account. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. It wasn't rebellion, it was arithmetic. Every dollar wired had carried a small fragment of me. I had called it love, they had called it duty. But duty without choice is debt, and I was done paying. I clicked. One line disappeared, then another, then all of them. The confirmation email arrived a minute later. Short, impersonal, perfect. Outside, the city breathed through the thin walls of my apartment, indifferent to my decision. I felt something almost electric run through me, not joy, not relief, something deeper, older. Maybe it was freedom's first tremor. I didn't need to say anything to them. The silence would deliver the message more effectively than any explanation. They would notice soon enough, when the money stopped arriving, when the expected rescue didn't come. They would call it betrayal. I would call it balance restored. That night, I slept with my phone face down and my conscience upright. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about saving anyone. I dreamt about leaving. By Thursday night, the air outside felt too still, the kind of quiet that waits for something unpleasant to arrive. I had just turned off my laptop when the knocking began, sharp, deliberate, familiar. I didn't move at first. My name came next, stretched by anger. wrapped in desperation. It was Carly's voice, and behind it, Mom's. They had found me. The pounding grew louder, echoing down the narrow hallway of my building. I could almost picture their faces on the other side of the door. Carly flushed with panic, Mom rehearsing outrage into righteousness. My stomach tightened, not from fear but from fatigue. I had given them so many versions of myself, the helper, the fixer, the rescuer. None had been enough. Tonight I would give them silence. I sat on the couch, every knock a drumbeat against the walls of my resolve. The sound carried an old rhythm, one that used to summon obedience. But silence, when chosen, is louder than shouting. After several minutes, I heard another voice, an older one, steady and sharp. Mrs. Grant, my neighbor. Her footsteps stopped outside. The tone of her scolding cut through the noise. A door closed, then another. The hallway went still again. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that belongs to someone who has survived a small storm. I checked the peephole once, more out of habit than curiosity. The corridor was empty. What lingered wasn't fear, it was the strange calm that follows disappointment you already expected. I knew they would escalate. Entitlement rarely retreats quietly. Inside, I poured myself tea, though my hands trembled faintly. The heat steadied me. There was something profoundly lonely about defending your own peace, but loneliness had become preferable to manipulation disguised as care. When the phone vibrated again, I ignored it. The messages kept arriving, each one shorter, colder. I didn't open any. My boundaries were holding, and boundaries, I was learning, are expensive things to maintain. They cost relationships built on dependency. An hour later, an email appeared, subject line, "Final warning." The words glowed on my screen like a flare in the dark. I hesitated, then opened it. The tone was what I expected, part ultimatum, part theater. Help Carly or lose this family. It read like a command disguised as heartbreak. I closed the window, deleted the message, and felt something inside me click into alignment. There was nothing left to negotiate. They wanted obedience. I wanted air. Both couldn't exist in the same room. I walked to the window, watched the streetlights burn steady over the quiet block. The world outside was indifferent, and that felt merciful. For years, I had mistaken chaos for connection, but peace, true peace, always arrives without witnesses. That night, I packed a small bag, not for escape but for readiness. I didn't know where I would go yet, but the idea of leaving no longer felt like running, it felt like returning to myself. When the clock reached midnight, I turned off the lights. The apartment was silent again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer defensive, it was deliberate. Somewhere in that stillness, I understood that the next time they knocked, I wouldn't be here to hear it. At dawn, the street outside was washed in the pale blue of beginning, the kind of light that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. I rolled my suitcase down the hallway, the sound of its wheels echoing like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Nothing about this move was sudden. It was the slowest escape I had ever planned. The air felt thinner as I stepped outside. My car waited like a witness, silent but knowing. I loaded my things methodically, boxes labeled in small, neat handwriting: office, kitchen, leave behind. Each label was a confession of what no longer fit into my life. Columbus looked softer in the rearview mirror. The skyline shrank until it became a rumor. The miles ahead didn't promise happiness, only distance, and for now, that was mercy enough. When I reached Cincinnati, the city greeted me with quiet streets and unfamiliar air. My new apartment was small but intact, its emptiness somehow kind. The first night there, I unpacked the bare essentials and let the silence introduce itself. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't loud. It was orderly. The next morning, I made the calls I had postponed for years. The first to the bank, explaining that I wanted to remove myself as a co-signer from Carly's car loan. The woman on the line spoke gently, almost too gently, as if she understood what this kind of request cost emotionally. She confirmed that the process would notify the primary borrower, my sister, and that she'd need to refinance within 30 days. Then came the apartment management office. Same request, same procedure. I imagined the moment Carly would open those letters, her certainty cracking just enough for reality to enter. It wasn't revenge, it was the natural end of dependency. Hours later, the confirmation emails arrived, formal, cold, absolute. Each line of text was a cut string. I read them twice, feeling both relief and grief sitting together quietly inside my chest. Freedom and loss often share the same room for a while before one leaves. That evening, I walked through the city, unfamiliar yet generous in its anonymity. No one here knew who I was, what I had done, or what I had chosen not to do. The anonymity felt like oxygen. Back at my apartment, I opened my inbox again. A new message waited under Mom's name. The subject line was an accusation dressed as mourning. If you do this, you destroy this family. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside, fear masquerading as love. I hovered over the message for a moment, then archived it. No anger, no satisfaction, just finality. Then, almost instinctively, I returned to the bank portal one last time. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page beside a single button. Confirm release. My finger hesitated only once before pressing it. A small loading circle spun for a few seconds. Then a line of text appeared. Request processed successfully. That sentence was unremarkable to anyone else, but to me, it felt like a verdict delivered after years of trial. Outside, a train passed in the distance, carrying strangers somewhere they actually wanted to be. I watched the city lights flicker on and thought about how endings rarely arrive with applause. Most of them slip in quietly, disguised as paperwork. When I finally went to bed, my phone stayed silent on the nightstand, and for once that silence didn't scare me. It felt earned. 2 weeks slipped by without ceremony. The city had already begun folding me into its rhythm: new coffee shop, new commute, new silence. The air in Cincinnati felt different, heavier but cleaner, as if it knew how to hold both relief and regret at once. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday, small and white, tucked between bills. I recognized Mom's handwriting immediately. Narrow, precise, always written like a threat hiding under politeness. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, folded a blanket, turned on a lamp, as if soft light could cushion whatever accusation waited inside. When I finally tore it open, the words didn't surprise me. Carly's car has been repossessed. She says you ruined her life. The sentence was both verdict and performance. At the bottom, a line written in darker ink. This is what happens when family stops being family. For a moment, I stared at it until the ink blurred slightly, as if the paper itself wanted to apologize for existing. But guilt has sharp instincts. It knows exactly where to land. It landed, briefly, and then passed through me like a storm that had already spent its rain. At work, Blair noticed the quiet edge in me. She didn't ask, only slid a small chocolate across the desk. That gesture became the only sentence I could handle that day. It said everything without demanding anything back. By evening, more messages followed Carly, this time from an unknown number. Her words were clipped, brittle. You think you're better now? They said you left us to drown. I didn't reply. The message wasn't an invitation. It was bait. Still, that night, the old ache returned. Freedom isn't always clean. It drags memories through the mud before setting them down to dry. I thought about Carly's face when she begged at the dinner table, about Mom's calculated silence beside her. Every scene replayed sharper, stripped of the illusion of love. They hadn't wanted me, they had wanted access. Later, a second letter came, this one stamped from a small law office. My hands didn't tremble, though my pulse did. Inside was a demand for financial responsibility reconsideration, signed by Mom. Legal language, emotionless, surgical. It was an attempt to turn guilt into paperwork. I read it twice, not for content, but for tone. It sounded like her voice always did when she wanted to make pain sound reasonable. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not to keep, but to remember how far I'd come from answering to it. That night, I walked by the river. The water was black glass under the city lights, reflecting nothing long enough to hold. I wondered if they were still calling me heartless, if they sat around the same table telling stories about how I'd abandoned them. Maybe they were. Maybe they needed a villain more than a daughter. The realization wasn't bitter, it was freeing. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just get distance. And distance, when chosen, is its own form of peace. When I got home, I unplugged the small answering machine I had kept out of habit. The click sounded final, like closing a door I didn't plan to open again. I went to bed with the lamp still on, light spilling across the floor like quiet proof that I existed somewhere beyond their reach. For the first time in years, the silence in my life belonged to me. A month later, I learned that silence has its own echo. It comes back to you in strange forms: screenshots, whispers, pitying looks from strangers. The first sign appeared in a message from Blair. Are you okay? She didn't elaborate, but her tone carried the weight of something seen but not said. Curiosity won before caution. I opened my phone and saw it, a post from Carly, public, dramatic, almost cinematic. The headline read like a confession wrapped in accusation: "When your own sister leaves you drowning." The comments swelled beneath it like applause at a tragedy. People I hadn't spoken to in years were dissecting my character as if morality were a group project. Each line of text felt familiar. The same phrases Mom used to use, polished now for an audience. She thinks she's better than us. Money changed her. The narrative had been edited, perfected, rehearsed. I was no longer Renee. I was a villain with a paycheck. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. Not angry, not shocked, just tired. Reputation is fragile until you stop needing it. That realization didn't soften the ache, but it made it bearable. At work, people pretended not to know. Blair left an extra coffee on my desk again, no words, just a quiet act of solidarity. I realized how different compassion looks when it doesn't come with strings attached. By afternoon, a few emails arrived from old acquaintances, thinly disguised curiosity masked as concern. They wanted details, drama, confirmation. I gave them none. Explaining myself had become a language I no longer spoke. That night, I sat by the window, the city stretching beneath me in quiet indifference. The glow of my phone was the only light left in the room. I scrolled through the comments once more, then through my own messages, none from them, of course, just echoes of the same old manipulation repackaged as morality. I thought about how easy it is for people to love you when you stay small, obedient, useful. The moment you choose peace over participation, you become a villain in their story. But villains sleep better. Still, a heaviness lingered. Not regret, something quieter, like grief without tears. I grieved the version of myself who once believed love could survive without respect. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, I made a decision that felt almost ceremonial. I opened my social media account, every picture, every comment, every trace of the person they still thought I was, and deleted it all. Years of digital evidence vanished in seconds. The confirmation prompt blinked. "Are you sure you want to delete your account?" I clicked yes. The screen went blank, replaced by a simple message. "Your account has been deactivated." The quiet that followed was vast, almost physical. I didn't lose anything worth keeping. Their noise stayed behind, trapped inside the echo chamber they built for themselves. I stepped outside into the morning air, the world unfiltered, unscripted, and finally mine. The sidewalk was wet from a passing rain, reflecting the rising sun in broken patterns. I watched it shimmer, and thought about how truth doesn't always need an audience, it just needs time. By the time I reached the corner, the phone in my pocket felt lighter, like it had been emptied of ghosts. For the first time, there were no messages waiting, no accusations, no demands. Just silence, the rare kind that doesn't hurt anymore. The first real snow came quietly, settling on the edges of the city like a secret. I watched from my apartment window as the world turned white in slow motion. It felt unfamiliar and gentle, a kind of silence that didn't ask for permission. Months had passed since I last heard my name in their voices. My phone no longer held threats or apologies, just reminders, grocery lists, the quiet machinery of a normal life. It was strange how peace could feel so uneventful, but that was the point. Nothing was happening, and nothing hurting was happening either. Every Sunday, I took long walks by the river. The air carried a cold honesty, and the water below never pretended to be still. Some days, I thought about writing a letter just to say that I was fine, but then I realized silence had already said it better. At work, Blair had become a quiet constant. Her friendship lived in small gestures, a shared lunch, a laugh too brief to linger, the ease of being around someone who didn't want to fix or claim me. Healing rarely looks cinematic. Most days, it looks like routine done with steadiness instead of survival. One afternoon, as I organized paperwork at my desk, an email arrived from an unknown address. The subject line read simply, "We hope you're happy." I didn't need to open it. I deleted it the way you swat a fly, instinctively, without thought or anger. Some things don't deserve ceremony. That evening, I took the long way home, letting the city lights blur through the frost on the bus window. I realized that freedom hadn't come from grand gestures or revenge. It had come from quiet boundaries, kept and honored. The power wasn't in punishing them, it was in no longer letting them define what I owed. At home, I made dinner, played soft music, and opened the windows just enough to let in the winter air. My life felt small but mine, and that ownership was worth every ounce of loss. Later, sitting on the couch with the lamp casting its familiar gold over the room, I thought about family, the word we're taught to protect even when it burns us. I used to believe keeping peace meant staying silent. Now I know peace has a cost, but silence is just another debt. They may still tell the story their way, but I've stopped auditioning for their forgiveness. Some relationships end not in rage but in recognition that love without respect isn't love at all. And letting go isn't cruelty, it's clarity. The snow outside deepened, covering the streets in clean, untouched layers. I stood by the window again, the city's hum fading beneath the hush. Somewhere beneath all that white was the ground I'd chosen for myself, solid, unshared, enough. For the first time, I whispered into the quiet, not a plea, not a defense, just a truth I finally believed. I did not lose them. I simply stopped losing myself. If you've ever had to walk away to find peace, your story matters too. Share it in the comments below. Someone out there might need to know that letting go isn't the end, it's the beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more family revenge stories that remind you. Sometimes choosing yourself is the strongest revenge of all.